So in this video I'm going to be showing you how to make these two little owls. They're made using basic sawing techniques and soldering, but I'm going to show you how to solder things like these tiny little eyes and make sure that they don't move around. Also, I'm going to show you how to fix some mistakes that I did that I know that a lot of people have ran into, and how I fixed them to make these perfectly usable now. So let's get started. So to start everything off, we're going to need to take our patterns and put them onto metal. And these are a little different from one another in different ways. We're only going to be using these two. And I've already put them onto some brass and copper. The brass sheet that I'm using is 0.5 millimeters and the copper is 0.7. So we're going to need to cut these out. And to cut these out, we're going to be using a jeweler's saw. To cut out the inside lines on this, you have to drill holes in them and then put the blade through and then cut it. And those are called piercing. So to do that, we need to use a center punch. It's basically just a sharp piece of steel that you hammer on one side to make little divots all around here so you can make drilling easier. Alright, so I'm going to start with this one first. And you only want to do this in places where you're going to be removing the material. You're just making little divots. And all you need is one little tap and it'll do that. So let's do that to everything. The other thing you need to keep in mind are the smaller areas where you might have a bigger hole than the actual area that you have to work with. So you need to make sure to design around that, or keep that in mind when you're making everything. So now we need to drill all these holes out on both of these. And we're going to use a very small drill bit. It's this one right here. And it is a 0.8 millimeter drill bit. So there we go, there's one. So there we go, we have both of these ready for our piercing cuts. Uses the same exact technique as this one, but you don't have to watch me cut it out. So, win-win. Alright, now that I have both these cut out, I need to clean up some of my cut lines on the inside of this before we solder this down. We're going to be using some assortment of diamond bits. So to make the toes, or the balls for the toes, we're going to be using this. This will make it so you can put a piece of wire inside of it and cut it to the same length every time. This particular wire is 16 gauge copper wire, and I have it on here to the 5mm point. And all I'm going to do is take my saw and cut it. So with these, you can also just measure it out on the wire and cut them that way too. You don't need that tool, but it just makes it easier, and you don't have to do any measuring. So for this part, you're going to need a charcoal block and some flux, some high temperature flux. And what you're going to do is take one of your pieces and put it onto the flat part, and take a little bit of flux and put it onto it, just so it has an easier time turning into a ball. And then we're going to use a Smith's little torch, which is hooked up to an oxygen acetylene torch system. You can't use the little propane ones to do this. And if you're going to be doing this, make sure that you have lots of ventilation set up so you don't suffocate from this. And what I'm going to do is heat the piece up. And once it balls up, remove the heat. And then as soon as that starts to dull, you can grab it with some tweezers and dunk it in some water. And you have a little brass ball, or not brass, copper ball. And you just repeat this process. So here are all the little copper balls once I remove them from the water. And you'll notice that they don't roll because the bottom is flat, because where we made them, the surface is flat. So we can solder these on easily and don't have to worry about having to grind the bottoms or anything weird like that. We do need to clean them up at times with like little pieces, like little ball things. They're hard to fish out of there. So I use a container like this and slightly submerge it. To the point where it's still floating, and make sure that whatever you put in here doesn't react to the acid badly and the heat. And I'm going to let that sit in there for 10-15 minutes, and it should clean off all of our little pieces. I'm also going to throw this in there, where you can see it has some weird tarnishing going on it. We need it to be as clean as possible. Okay, so it's been a bit, and I'm going to take this out. And then rinse these off, just to get the acid off of them. Okay, so we're going to use the one that is all one piece first. What I'm going to do is use some high temperature flux. This is actually called Handy Flux. And I'm going to paint it over the surface. The soldering technique we're about to do is called sweat soldering. So basically I'm going to put solder on this piece and then melt it so it's stuck to it. And then I will take it and put it onto the other piece. And then heat the two and it will fuse together. So I'm going to use some hard silver solder. Okay, now that I have all those little pieces on, I'm going to slowly heat it up and just wait until all the solder melts without melting the piece. Okay, now that everything has started to melt or is melted, you need to take this off. Problem is, it will be stuck. So you need to heat it until you can pull it off like that. If you don't do that, it's going to be stuck and you're going to bend everything and you're not going to have a good time. So take this and quench it in the water. There we go. Now this is going to have to go inside of the pickling solution. Okay, so here it is out of the pickling solution. It still has a little bit of dark spots on it, but this should be cleaned up enough, and see how it's turning pink? And this is brass, so yeah, don't leave brass in pickling solution for too long. So the front of this doesn't matter what it looks like right now, and the back, we'll see if all the solder points work. So we're going to take this and this back piece. So I'm going to put Flux on the top piece. So I'm not going to put any on the back. And the reason for that is because I'm using silver and this is copper, it could bleed onto it and then I have to clean up a lot more. So if I leave it like this and just put this on top of it, it should only be in the spots where it needs to be. So I'm going to heat this up first so it's just no longer wet, and then put them together and solder it all together. Alright, got it all lined up. It's gonna be off of the plate a bit because there's solder on the back. You'll see as I solder this from the, or heat this, it'll sink down, and then I'm going to probably have to move it in place. Okay, so this is not done. There's a lot of points that didn't come down all the way, but they're a lot closer now. So I'm going to take this and put it in the pickling solution, and then just reheat it while covering it in Flux, and then I'm going to have to clean up the inside of the frame. Okay, so here it is after it's been sitting for a little bit with Flux all over it. So now everything should flow properly and fill in any of the little gaps that it missed. So when you're heating it like this, you can actually see where it's connected because you'll see everything glow at the same time. Things that are not connected won't glow. So just take this and quench it in some water. So there we go. It's a little off on this side, and that's one of the benefits to using just a big flat piece for this. Also, you would cover up all these points that are just exposed. So it depends on how you want to make yours. But we need to clean this up first by putting it back in the pickling solution again. So while we have that other one in the pickling solution, I'm going to show you how I'm going to solder this to this. And I'm not going to cut this out, it'll just be basically a flat sheet and this on top of it. And I'll show you how to put the little parts of the eyes in. So we're going to do the same thing with this one, which is put little pieces of solder on it. I'm using hard solder on this again. So I'm going to quench this in some water. And then put this into the pickling solution also. Okay, here's the owl out of the pickling solution. And I just went over it real quick with a wire brush to clean off anything that was stuck on it still. You can tell the finish is pretty bad on it. This is okay, and you can tell that everything almost looks copper. This will change after we get the rest of the soldering done. And even the back, you can see some like scarring in it, and all that will be polished off. So now we need to put the little feet on, and then once we put the feet on, we'll put a ring on the back, and this will be good to go on to being polished and cleaned up and looking how we want it to in the end. So to put the feet on, they're going to go down here, and we're going to use the little ball feet on this one. Going to put some flux right here, and then I'm going to switch to a medium solder. So I'm just going to place 2 chips there, and I'm going to place the little ball things over the top of them. So each little ball, I'm going to just touch the end of it with some flux to make sure it stays clean, and then place it on top of it. And I'll adjust everything once I get them on here. So we need this to dry out. And to do that, we have 2 options. One is we could just let this sit here and that will all dry out and everything will stay in place. Or 2, you can slowly heat this to make it go faster and then go on from there. So I'm going to slowly heat this and keep a pair of tweezers in my hand just in case if anything moves, so I can move it back. Yeah, as soon as you see it to start to bubble, you want to move away from it. Little bubbles could be okay, but as soon as it starts to like boil, it basically just moves everything. So there we go. So when soldering little things on like this, you still need to heat up the whole piece for the most part to make sure that everything is heated equally. Okay, and I can see a little piece of solder is trying to escape right here. Okay, now I'm going to go underneath. And just continuously move all over the place on this. Try not to stay in one spot for too long or you will melt it. Alright, there we go. So I'm going to take this and put it into the water to anneal it. And then so one good thing to do is to check to make sure that these are actually attached, because they could just be stuck there from the flux. So just kind of push on them, be careful not to stab yourself with these, and then check them again after this comes out of the pickling solution. So that's where it's going now. So when it comes to our other one, all we need to do, place that down, paint the top of it with Flux. My screen is pretty hot right now, so that's why I'm not touching it. And then I'm going to paint the back side of this. And just put it down like so. It doesn't really matter where it is, because there's nothing to line up with. And basically you just have to make sure that it's on the piece. So we're gonna solder that down now. We're not gonna put the eyes or toes on yet. And sometimes that just doesn't work. It did go down in a couple spots, but it looks like the flux burnt off faster than everything would solder down, so everything's dirty now. So take this and put it into your pickling pot, clean it up, and we can try again. Okay, so here's the other piece, and if you look at the side, it didn't go down. So we're going to reflux the entire piece with more flux, and this should fix the problem. And make sure to get under everything. I think what happened was I put too little on last time. There we go. Make sure that your solder flows everywhere. You'll see a little outline around everything. So there we go. Just quench it in some water to cool it down so you can handle it. Got a little bit of a warp from the heat. So this goes back into the pickling solution again to get it cleaned up. And then we're going to solder the rest of the pieces on. Once all the pieces are on, I'm going to cut this out. And back to the other one. You can see it's all attached. And I'm going to check these again to make sure that they're all the way on. Looks like we're good. And there's no gaps. A little bit of a bend to it, which I'll flatten back out. Should be good to go with that. So what I've been doing to shine these up and get rid of all this brown is just using a steel wire wheel and just lightly going over. So there we go. Still, there's some solder on the front that we're going to have to take off. And there's also the fact that this is not brass colored anymore. So we'll have to address that. But we're going to make a way to hang it first, and then go through and clean everything up and make this look really nice. We're also going to patina this to give it some darker spots on the copper, and then brighten up all the brass. So to make the ring, I'm going to be using some copper wire. This is 16 gauge. And I'm not going to need too much of this. So just cut off a little bit. Then I'm going to use this little mandrel. It's a little step mandrel that you can get. You can also use a drill bit if you don't have one of these and you have more large drill bits laying around. For instance, if you have a drill bit like this, you can measure here to figure out what size it is, and then you can wrap it around it. Just hold one end with pliers, put it on the opposite side, and you're going to want these to be tighter. Just press them together. And there you go. So now that you have that, we need to cut it. So to cut it, I'm just going to use a jeweler saw. And I'm going to move over to my bench pen. And we need to cut a straight line through this. And typically, I'll go on the side that doesn't have one of the ends to cut through. Start by pushing up and cutting at an angle to just start on the first ring. And then make sure you keep your fingers on the other side of all this, because if this slips or anything, you're going to cut your finger. And then I'm going to slowly start to straighten the blade out, so it's cutting all of them. And you're going to lose the first little bit there. Now, completely straighten this out and make sure that the blade is real close to your bench pen itself. So when it does go through, it stops on that and doesn't hit your finger. And if you get caught like I just did, just wiggle this a little bit, and it might be because one of the rings are free. And if you get real caught like I am, it means something bends. So you can work your way out of it. This could break your blade too, so be careful of that. And if you do break a blade doing this, that's totally fine. So there we go. Try not to lose them like I just did. Luckily, we only need 2 of these. So these are your usable rings, and these are the extra bits that you cut off. So here's our owl. And now you can see how you want these to go onto it. So basically, I just want it like that. And then we'll use a secondary ring above it for the necklace part to go through. So I'm just going to push down on this to hold it in place and mark on here where the top is. And then with some tweezers, I'm going to hold this. Actually, I'm going to use some pliers so they grip a little bit better. And then going to just go a little below the lines that I made and snip it off. You could also use a jeweler saw and just cut a straight line through this. And to smooth out the edge from where it was clipped, just hold that and use a file. Ooh, a really rusty file. Must have got some water on this. There we go. So to line this up so you can solder this on, we're going to have to use one of our little extra pieces, or you can just cut another piece of wire, or even use one of the extra rings and place it about right here. Then you can place this like so. That way it holds it up because this is now layered and it would just fall down. But we need to remove this. And we're going to have to add some flux here. Also, you're going to want to flux your ring. And it melts and doesn't touch the ring. You can heat it and try to push this into it. So we're back to our other one that had a little bit of a mess up. I'm just gonna add some more flux to the area. One side at least is down, so we don't have to worry about the other one. Grab one more small piece of solder. There we go. That's how it should have went the first time. So there it is, with its little ring on. So it goes back into the pickling solution one more time, get it all cleaned up. Okay, so here's our other owl. You need to put its eyes in and its little claws. I'm going to put some flux in the eye area and on the feet. And then I have enough in here extra that I can just kind of soak this piece in. I'm going to push them up there. And then the same thing with the toes. Push them up a little bit, because we have to put solder on. So now we have all that. I'm going to pick this up, move it onto here, and now I'm going to heat this up from the back as slow as I can to get everything to flow properly. And keep the tweezers handy. Okay, the eyes are set. Let's get the toes done. And there we go. Go ahead and quench that. So now I'm going to put this into our pickling pot again, and then I'm going to cut it out and solder on our last piece. Okay, so we're going to cut this one out, and we need some sort of line here to follow with a little bump in the head. There we go, that should be good. So there we go. Let's put our ring on the back. So another way you could do a ring for these is make a much bigger one. It really depends on your style. So this is just a metal rod that I have. Same thing as before with the drill bit, besides this is much bigger. And here we go, we have a bigger ring. This one I can actually move with my hands to flatten it out. And what you could do is take this, and you could solder this entire ring to the back of any size you want. And that's how it would look from the front. So it's really up to you and your design style. I'm actually going to connect this first and then solder it to here. So a really quick and easy way to solder a ring together, especially a simple one like this. Flux the joint area and grab a piece of solder. I'm going to be using a piece of hard solder for this because we're going to be soldering this twice. And set the joint on top of the solder chip. So with the joint on top of the solder chip like that, it has nowhere to jump around or go. So if you heat this up evenly, just watch the chip. And there we go. That's a really quick way to solder rings together. So you can see that it's completely together now. I do have to put this into our pickling solution to clean it up before we can solder it to the back, but that won't take long. Okay, so here's our owl, and here's our newly soldered ring, and I've actually decided to move it up a bit, so it's going to be like that. So to solder this on, we just need to put the owl face down, and we're going to need to put this on here like so. And then you're going to notice that it's at an angle because it's a different level. I'm going to use a piece of the same wire because it happens to be the thickness I need, and stack it underneath it. Just happens to be one of the rings I made earlier, but you can just use a cutting of wire also. So once I have it looking how I want it to, I'm going to remove that and put some flux on here, and then put some flux on the ring itself. Alright, so now I just need to add a little bit of easy solder. There we go, now it's all one piece. So there we go. So I'm just going to use the wire wheel again. So I'm going to switch to an 80 grit sanding disc. And now I'm going to switch from the 80 grit to a 220 grit. So to add a patina to this, I'm going to be using some hot water in a glass jar and some liver salt. So I'm just going to take this wire that I use for this and mix it in. Then I'm going to take some copper wire, make a little hook on it, and then dip this into the solution. So as our other owl is drying, we're going to clean this one up and then patina it. So we're going to do something a little bit different with this, and we're going to add texture to the background. We're going to be using a diamond bit. So you can see that it has a matte texture now, and everything else has a slight shine or brushed look. So we're going to go over all the rest of it. So there we go. And I'm going to leave the eyes all nice and shiny. So to tarnish this one, I'm going to be using Jack's Chemicals Ultra Black. And basically I'm just going to paint this on. The good thing with this one is it doesn't have any smell. Unlike the liver sulfur, which smells like rotten eggs. And this one can actually darken brass, too. Like, don't get me wrong, liver sulfur can darken brass, but it doesn't do this much of a black effect to it. Also, whenever using chemicals, make sure to wear gloves or don't touch the thing. In my case, I'm just not touching it. So I'm just going to take that and let it hang just like the other one to dry. Okay, so here both of them are after they dried out. So I'm going to start with this one and use some 600 grit only on the top surface. Okay, so the back of it I'm going to just kind of take down some of the black with the wire wheel. Then I'm going to use a brass wire wheel on the front. Okay, for the second one, I'm going to do the same thing. There we go, both of them are done. Now all you need to do is seal these, and I use a sealer that is actually this one. And then I'll show some shots after they're all dried up and in a white box, basically. So thank you for watching my video, and if you liked it, feel free to leave a thumbs up. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave a comment below. And if you would like to be updated every time I post a new video, subscribe to my channel. I try to put out a new video every week. Well, thank you for watching, and see you guys next time. Bye!